crowd pressed tightly around him. Voices shouted, feet shuffled, and the sound of excitement filled the air. Yet hidden in that restless crowd was a woman who had suffered for 12 long years. Weak, rejected, and without hope, she pushed through the people with trembling hands. Her heart beat fast, as one thought echoed in her mind. If I can just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. Jesus was walking through the busy streets, surrounded by a great crowd. People followed him everywhere he went because they had heard of his miracles. Some came out of curiosity, others with desperate needs, and many with faith that he could change their lives. On this day, he was on his way to the house of Jairus, a synagogue leader whose young daughter was very sick and close to death. Jairus had begged Jesus to come quickly, and the people pressed harder to see what would happen. The air was heavy. With voices, mothers held their children high to catch a glimpse. Old men leaned on their staffs, trying not to be pushed aside. Everyone wanted to be near him. In the middle of this noise and movement was a woman no one noticed. She kept her head low, her body hidden by the crowd. For 12 years she had lived with bleeding that never stopped. Doctors could not heal her, and she had spent all her money trying to find a cure. Instead of getting better, she only grew. Worse, her suffering was more than physical. In her society, a woman with bleeding was considered unclean. She could not join the temple worship, and people avoided her touch. For 12 years, she lived in shame, loneliness, and rejection. Every step she took toward Jesus was filled with risk. If the crowd realized who she was, they might push her away in anger. But the pain in her body and the ache in her soul had gone on too long. She could not stay back any longer. The crowd was like a wall in front of her. Men pressed close to Jesus. Children ran at his side, and the narrow street left little space to move. Yet something stronger than fear pushed her forward. She whispered to herself, "If I can only touch his garment." Not his hand, not his face, not even his words. Just the edge of his robe would be enough. She believed that even the smallest contact with him could bring healing. Her body was weak, but her faith was strong. She pushed between shoulders, slipped past elbows, and ignored the angry looks of those she brushed against. Every step made her heart pound faster. She drew closer and closer, until at last she saw him clearly in front of her. The crowd pressed in, but she stretched out her trembling hand. Her fingers reached toward the hem of his garment. Just a thread. Just a touch. The woman's breath was short and uneven as she fought her way through the crowd. Every push against another body reminded her of her weakness. Her legs trembled, and her thin frame bent under the weight of 12 years of suffering. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to live without pain. Every morning she woke up with the same sickness, and every night she went to bed with the same hopeless thoughts. People did not understand her struggle. They did not know the loneliness of being untouchable, the sting of being avoided, the silence of being unwanted. For years she had been cut off from family dinners, from prayers at the temple, from simple moments of sitting close to another person. She lived in the shadows, carrying her shame like a heavy stone. But on this day, her spirit refused to stay hidden. She had heard of Jesus, the teacher who healed the blind and opened the ears of the deaf. She had heard whispers of his power to set people free. Something inside her stirred when she listened to those stories. For the first time in years, she felt hope rise like a small flame in her chest. That flame carried her feet into this crowd. That flame burned brighter as she saw him walking just a few steps away. Her mind was filled with both fear and faith. Fear told her she did not belong here. Fear reminded her that people would be angry if they recognized her. Fear screamed that she was unworthy to come close to a holy man like him. Yet faith whispered louder. Faith said a single touch could heal what no doctor had been able to cure. Faith said she did not need to speak or be noticed. Faith told her to stretch her hand, even if her whole body shook with weakness. She moved closer, pressing past men who argued and women who tried to keep their children near. Someone shouted at her for bumping into them, but she kept her eyes fixed on the robe that brushed against the ground ahead. Her heart pounded so hard it echoed in her ears. The moment felt endless, as if time itself slowed down. Her trembling fingers finally reached forward. The rough fabric of his garment touched her skin, just for a second, just the edge. Yet in that instant, something beyond human strength rushed through her body. She felt warmth flood into her veins. Her pain, which had lived with her for 12 long years, disappeared. The flow of blood stopped immediately. Her weakness melted away. Her shoulders straightened. Her body felt whole for the first time in more than a decade. She stood frozen, her hands still trembling, her eyes wide with wonder. It was not imagination, it was real. She knew without a doubt that she was healed. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of joy, of freedom. For 12 years she had been trapped in suffering, and now in a single moment she was free. But before she could slip away quietly, before she could fade back into the crowd with her miracle, everything changed. Jesus suddenly stopped walking. The crowd pressed close, but he did not take another step. He turned slowly, his eyes searching. His voice, calm yet filled with authority, broke through the noise around him. He asked a question that no one expected. Who touched me? The street grew strangely quiet when Jesus stopped moving. The people around him did not understand why he had paused. Jairus, desperate for his dying daughter, urged him to hurry, but Jesus did not take another step. His eyes moved slowly over the crowd, and his voice rang clear above the noise. Who touched me? The disciples exchanged confused glances. One of them laughed nervously and said, Master, the crowd is pressing all around you. Dozens of people are touching you at this very moment. How can you ask such a question? To them, it made no sense. Everyone was pushing against him, trying to get closer, brushing his shoulders, bumping into his arms. Yet Jesus' expression did not change. His eyes were sharp, focused, certain. He said again, Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. A ripple of unease spread through the people. Some stepped back, others looked at each other. In wonder, the woman who had just been healed felt her heart stop in her chest. Fear washed over her like a flood. She had hoped to disappear quietly into the crowd, carrying her miracle in silence. But Jesus was calling her out. He knew, had felt her touch. He had felt the pull of her faith. Her hands shook as she clutched her robe. Should she run? Should she hide? Every eye might turn toward her if she stepped forward. For 12 years, she had been looked at with judgment and rejection. Now she feared facing the same shame again. Yet deep inside, she knew she could not remain hidden. Something about his voice, firm yet gentle, drew her. It was not the voice of anger. It was not the tone of condemnation. It was the voice of someone who had already given her what she needed, but still wanted something more than her healing. He wanted her heart. The crowd murmured, restless, waiting to see what would happen next. Jesus stood patient, unmoving, giving space for the one who had touched him to reveal herself. The silence stretched on like a heavy cloak, pressing against the woman's chest. At last, she could not resist. Trembling from head to toe, she stepped forward. Her knees bent beneath her, and she fell at his feet in front of everyone. The people gasped when they saw her. Whispers spread quickly as some recognized her face. That woman, the unclean one, the outcast, the one no one touched. Now she was kneeling before Jesus, shaking, her tears falling into the dust at his sandals. Her voice broke as she confessed everything. She told him of her suffering, her sickness, her loneliness. She told him of her desperate plan to touch his garment. She told him how in an instant the bleeding had stopped and her body had been healed. The entire crowd listened in silence. Every word carried the weight of 12 years of pain and 12 seconds of miracle. And as her trembling voice faded, all eyes turned to Jesus, waiting to hear how he would respond. The woman's voice faded into silence, and the crowd held its breath. Dust clung to her tears as she knelt at the feet of the one she had just touched. Her body trembled, not from sickness anymore, but from fear of what he might say. For years, she had lived with rejection. She had been called unclean, cursed, forgotten. Would this holy man scold her for daring to touch him? Would he send her back into the shadows where she had lived for so long? But Jesus did not step back. He did not look at her with disgust, nor did he turn away as others had done. Instead, he bent slightly toward her, his face calm, his eyes filled with compassion. His voice broke the heavy silence, not with judgment, but with words that carried warmth and life. "Daughter," he said. The word itself was like a beam of light piercing through 12 years of darkness. Daughter. She had not been called that in so long. For years, no one had spoken to her with affection. No one had reminded her that she still belonged, that she was still loved, that she was still a child of God. Yet in a single word, Jesus restored her identity. He gave her more than healing. He gave her a place again. He continued. The crowd gasped softly at his words. They saw her no longer as an outcast, but as someone honored by the teacher himself. He did not credit his garment, nor the touch of her hand. He pointed to her faith, the courage within her heart, as the reason she was healed. It was not just her body that had changed. Her spirit, long crushed by shame and rejection, now stood tall in dignity. Peace. That was the gift he placed into her life. Not only freedom from sickness, but freedom from fear. Not only strength in her body, but wholeness in her soul. Those words wrapped around her like a gentle embrace. Go in peace.
And walk without fear.
Live without shame. The woman rose slowly too. Her feet, tears still glistened in her eyes, but now they were tears of joy. The same crowd that once ignored her now stepped back in awe. For years she had been invisible, but in this moment all could see her restoration. She did not need to hide anymore. She did not need to shrink away in shame. She had been healed, blessed and called daughter by the very Son of God. The road was still crowded. The noise of people still filled the air, but for her the world felt suddenly quiet and bright. Every step she would take from this day forward would be different. Every glance from others would feel different. She had touched his garment, but more importantly, he had touched her heart. The air around them shifted. The silence that had settled during the woman's confession gave way to murmurs, gasps, and whispers. The crowd, which had moments ago been restless and impatient, now stood frozen in awe. They had seen miracles before, but this one was different. It was not a blind man crying out, not a leper calling for cleansing, not a paralyzed man lowered through a roof. This was a woman who had dared to reach out in secret, without a word, without a request, yet had been answered in full. Some of the people looked at her with wonder. Realizing how close she had stood among them all along, carrying a burden they never noticed. Others felt shame, remembering the times they had avoided her, spoken cruel words, or crossed the street to keep their distance. A few still struggled to understand, whispering to each other about how such healing could come from a single touch. But all agreed on one thing. Something divine had taken place before their eyes. Children stared wide, tugging at their mother's robes, asking questions about what had just happened. Older men stroked their beards in silence, their minds unable to find words. Women felt a sudden closeness to the one who had suffered, as if her healing gave them hope for their own hidden pains. And in the middle of them all, Jesus stood calm. His presence, commanding more than aught, commanded reflection. They began to realize that this moment was not only about one woman's healing, it was a lesson for everyone pressing close to him. That day, many had brushed against him, yet nothing had changed for them. They had crowded him, pushed against him, pressed from every side, but only one had reached out with faith. Only one had touched him in a way that drew his power. It was not the physical touch that mattered, but the belief hidden in her heart. The lesson sank deep into the crowd. They began to understand that being near him was not enough. Walking beside him, pressing against him, seeing his face, it was not enough. Faith was the difference. Faith was the key. And the woman once ignored and rejected had become the living picture of that truth. Jairus, who had been urging Jesus to hurry, stood in silence as well. Even with his heart heavy for his sick daughter, he could not deny the power of what he had just witnessed. This miracle, so unexpected, so sudden, was like a flame in the darkness of his worry. If Jesus could heal this woman after 12 years of hopelessness, then surely he could bring healing to his own child. The woman wiped her tears and stepped back into the crowd. But now she was not hidden. She was no longer the invisible outcast. She was a testimony, a living story of what faith could do. And though Jesus turned again to continue toward Jairus' house, the people who walked with him carried a new weight in their hearts. They had not just seen a healing, they had seen faith come alive. As the crowd slowly began moving again, the story of that woman did not fade. Her trembling steps, her desperate hand, her quiet touch, those images remained in the minds of everyone who had seen it. It was not only the people on that street who needed to learn from her faith. It is a message carried across time, whispered into every heart that hears it. Even today, for 12 years, she had lived in silence, yet her faith spoke louder in one moment than 1,000 prayers shouted in fear. She did not have strength, but she had belief. She did not have wealth, but she had courage. She did not have a voice to call out to him, but she had a heart that trusted in his power. And that was enough. It was faith, not force, that reached Jesus. It was trust, not touch, that unlocked her healing. This story reminds us that sometimes life presses us down until we feel invisible. Pain lasts longer than we thought it would. Hope slips through our fingers. We look around and it feels like everyone else has their prayers answered while we are left waiting. That woman knew what it meant to wait. 12 years of waiting. 12 years of disappointment. 12 years of hearing no from every doctor and feeling never in every part of her soul. Yet even after 12 years, she still believed. There could be a yes in Jesus. Her courage whispers to us across the centuries, do not give up. Do not let the weight of years steal the power of one moment. Faith does not need to be loud. It does not need to be seen. It does not need to be perfect. Faith only needs to reach. And when it reaches, even if only for the edge of his garment, heaven notice too how Jesus called her daughter. He could have simply let her slip away healed, could have let her keep her miracle in secret. But he wanted her to know she was more than a body healed. She was a soul restored. He wanted her to hear that she was loved, claimed, and accepted. And so it is with anyone who dares to come to him. He does not only fix what is broken, he restores what was lost. The deeper message of this story is simple but powerful. Being near him is not enough. Crowds pressed against him that day, but only faith drew his power. Many touched him, but only one was changed. It is not about how close you stand, but how much you believe. It is not about how loud you cry, but how much you trust. Her story is a mirror for us all. Some of us carry hidden wounds, sickness no one sees, loneliness no one hears, shame no one understands. And maybe like her, we hide behind the crowd, hoping no one notices our struggle. But the same truth remains. One touch of faith can turn years of pain into a single moment of peace. The road that day did not stay silent for long. The crowd soon began moving again, following Jesus toward the house of Jairus. But in the hearts of those who had witnessed the moment, something had shifted. They had not only seen a miracle, they had seen a truth. The power of God was not reserved for the loudest voice or the strongest body. It was not locked behind wealth, status, or title. It was unlocked by faith. The woman who once lived in the shadows now walked in the light. She had come broken, trembling, hidden. She left standing tall, her eyes lifted, her spirit restored. One simple act of courage, reaching out through fear, had changed the rest of her life. And in calling her daughter, Jesus gave her more than healing. He gave her a name, a belonging, a place in the family of God. Her story still calls to us, because every heart knows what it feels like to carry pain. Every soul knows the weight of fear and the ache of waiting. Some wounds are visible, others remain hidden deep inside, but all of us long for the touch that makes us whole. The question is not whether he has the power, his power never fails. The question is whether we will reach out in faith, even if all we can grasp is the edge of his garment. Faith does not always look strong. Sometimes it trembles. Sometimes it whispers instead of shouts. Sometimes it crawls through the crowd, afraid of being seen. But faith that reaches, even in weakness, touches heaven. And heaven always answers. Imagine her final steps home that evening, no longer dragging her feet, no longer avoiding the eyes of neighbors, no longer hiding her face in shame. For the first time in 12 years, she walked with peace. And as the sun set on that day, her story rose like a flame that could never be put out. A story of courage, a story of restoration, a story of faith. And so the message is left for every listener, every soul that carries a hidden wound. Do not be afraid to reach out. Do not believe the lie that it is too late. Do not let the years of pain tell you the answer will never come. One touch of faith is enough. One moment of courage is enough. One step toward him is enough. She came, broken and left whole. She came unseen and left as a daughter. She came trembling and left in peace. And her story still whispers today. If you dare to believe, even the smallest touch can change everything.